Good evening. Hope everybody's doing good. It was a beautiful day outside. I had a little frost on the windshield early this morning, but man, it's been beautiful out there. It's nice to not have all the wind we had last weekend, and I know gives a break in the. Did that just go loud all of a sudden? Okay. Good for the fires that we were having. I have mine already. Thank you. We are getting a little late start. Apologize about that, but we were standing in line for the copier, and I just now had my turn. Go ahead and open your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 9. We're going to be looking at one chapter tonight, session 18, on our study of Kingdom Come, our look at 2 Kings. Call this and tonight Jehu's Revenge. Jehu's Revenge. Don't forget while you're turning there and getting your handout here that this coming Sunday is our Mission Sunday, and the goal is $35,000 to be offered to go towards missions for next year. So it's a challenge for us to do what we can to maybe go above and beyond what we normally give on a Sunday morning and have a good gathering of the resources that are needed to keep our works going the way they are going. And we do have a guest speaker. We'll have Norman Atchison, and I also found out a couple days ago he is bringing some of the children from the children's home to be here. So that's going to be really cool to see them. It'll be good for us to get to see these faces, those of us who've been there. And Samuel, he went this last summer too, and Maggie did, so that was a blessing. But we'll have them here with us and get to meet them and hear him. We'll have normal classes. He is going to do the talk on the Sunday morning sermon through the eyes of a child. And then afterwards, we'll have our fifth Sunday meal. So we have a planned meal afterwards, and there'll be a little bit of question answering session with him. So keep that in your prayers, that we meet our goal and that we do the best we can in trying to participate in the mission work that's going on around the world. All right, let's look at chapter 9 summary. Here we go. 2 Kings 9. Elisha sends out one of the people from the company of the prophets, so one of the prophets. He says, I want you to go to Ramoth Gilead. I want you to find a guy there by the name of Jehu. You're to take this flask of oil, and when you get there, I want you to anoint him and say these words. This is verse 3. This is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel. And then what I want you to do is, as soon as you say that, open the door and run. I found that interesting. The prophet did just as Elisha said do, but he also gave these details. Now, I think that these details were actually probably what Elisha told Jehu to say, but in the opening line, we just not given the detail, we're just given a summary of it. But if you look at verses 7 through 10, here are some of the details. He's not just saying, I anoint you as king. Here's what we find out also, verse 7. You are to destroy the house of Ahab, your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her. Then he opened the door and ran. Okay? Jehu's fellow officials wanted to know what the maniac wanted. The company of the prophets, that guy, the prophet that brought this message to Jehu, they're saying that what does this maniac want? Maybe because he ran out. I don't know. And Jehu says something interesting. Oh, you know, You always know what he says. And they said, no, we don't. What do you say? He said, well, I'm going to become king. And they take their cloaks off and they lay it down on the ground in front of him and they blow a trumpet and they shout, Jehu is king. And after becoming king, Jehu conspires against Joram. Now remember Joram, along with Ahaziah. Joram had been wounded in battle and had to flee. And Ahaziah had gone after him in Jezreel to check on him. These two allied kings had tried to go up against the king of Aram. And so he goes to, he wants to conspire against Joram and Ahaziah as well. And he gives these instructions in verse 15. He says to not let anybody know that he's king yet. In other words, or word for word, it's, if you desire to make me king, don't let anyone slip out of the city to go tell the news in Jezreel. He wants it to be a surprise. So he and his troops are on the way to Jezreel. There's a lookout on the tower. I see troops coming. Well, all right. Who is it? Well, Joram sent a horseman to go out and inquire about the nature of the visit. In verse 18, we read this. This is what the king says, do you come in peace? Jehu replies, with what do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me. And so the messenger does that, and the lookout says, well, he's reached him, but now he's not coming back. Again, the king, Joram, sent out another horseman. Same thing. Do you come in peace? What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me. He doesn't come back. But this time the lookout on the tower says, well, he's not coming back either, but the driving that I can see is like the driving of Jehu. Do you ever stereotype drivers in Medford? You know, a mile away you can tell, I know who that is. That's old Clyde, or that's Ruby, or that's so-and-so. Okay? All right, he drives like a maniac. That's interesting. That's the second time we've had that word today. Joram ordered that his own chariot be hitched up so he could ride out to Jehu. What we actually see is Joram and Ahaziah both go out to where Jehu is, which happens to be on the plot of ground that had formerly been owned by Naboth. The one that was the vineyard that was taken by Jezebel because Ahab wanted it and he didn't get it, and she said, let me take care of it. Joram asked Jehu, do you come in peace? That's the third time he's asked. Here's his response to Joram, verse 22. How can there be peace as long as all the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound? And Joram turned about and fled, calling out to Ahaziah, treachery, Ahaziah. In other words, it's a trap, run, okay? Jehu shot an arrow between the shoulders of Joram, then instructs his chariot officer named Bidkar to throw Joram out on the ground to fulfill the prophecy concerning the prophecy about Naboth and his sons who had seen the bloodshed. Ahaziah fled to Beth-Hagen, but Jehu chased him, instructing everybody to kill him too. He was wounded, and he goes to Megiddo and dies there. Then Jehu goes to Jezreel. And Jezebel prepares to confront him by putting on makeup and looking out the window and saying to him, verse 31, have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master? So Zimri here is being used in the way of, it's kind of like the name Benedict Arnold. You know, there was a person named Benedict Arnold, and sometimes those who are kind of seen with the activity of treason and traitor to the country is called a Benedict Arnold. Here it's more of a Zimri, you killed your master. And Jehu looks up at the window where Jezebel is looking out, And he asks, is there anybody up there that's on my side? And it says 2 or 3 eunuchs peek out the window, and he says to them, throw her down. And they do. And her blood splattered all over the wall, and the horses trampled her body underfoot. Jehu went in and eats and drinks, and then says in verse 34, take care of that cursed woman, bury her, for she was a king's daughter. But when they go outside to bury her, what do they find? Not much. Her skull, her hands, and her feet. Everything else had been devoured. I'm assuming by the dogs, since that is the prophecy. After reporting back to Jehu, he says, and this is the last 2 verses, 36, 37. This is the word of the Lord that he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbite. On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's body will be like dung on the ground in the plot at Jezreel, so that no one will be able to say, this is Jezebel. No honor for the remains of such a wicked woman like Jezebel, in other words. All right. Thoughts? Jeff, you remember reading this story before? You didn't know about the part that she was thrown out the window? Yeah. Anybody on this side? You've heard this story before? Very wicked woman. Yes. Who taught that? Stafford? Was it Hugo McCord? No, he would have been new. Jim Jones? Yes, okay. Not the other Jim Jones. Yeah. Anything besides what you see on the outline there, anything that hits you, resonates with you, makes you think about, or have a question, or what part of this chapter did you like, and which part maybe did you dislike? Are you wanting to somebody make a movie so you could watch this and see how it all went down? It is close to Halloween, I guess. Well, let's look at our questions to ponder here. Why do you think Elisha wants the prophet to run out the door after he gives the message to Jehu? It doesn't seem to be that there's going to be a threat by Jehu against this prophet. Okay. I just think that's interesting. He's following the instructions of Elisha. Go give him this message. You're going to be the next king. And then open the door and run. You think there was something Elisha was afraid might happen to this prophet? Or let me go ahead and give you I can hear my phone ringing all the way from my office. Let me give you a possible theory that I worked on today. This is maybe a little far-fetched. I'm going to take you to a totally different, this is going to be so random you're thinking this is awkward. How many of you know that there are several documented events where mountain bikers coming down a hill get chased by mountain lions? Google it. You'd be surprised how often that does occur. And the reason that it occurs is very simple. What kind of eater is a mountain lion? He is carnivore and he's a predator. What kind of instincts do they have? It chases. So when something fast goes by, it's almost that reaction like the dog has, squirrel. It catches their attention, and what are they doing? They're all obsessed about getting to that squirrel. And a mountain lion, whether she put thought into it or not, instincts kicks in. Now, I don't think that the instincts necessarily are what's involved here, but I think instincts can resemble a lot like learned behaviors. Another example of this. I pull up to the stoplight next to you and I rev my engine. What are you likely to do? Speed up with the light. Watch her. Typically, at least we boys did this, we'd rev our engine back. And when somebody looked over and said, you were ready, right? Is that how it goes down in Medford? We actually had some drag races here a couple of weekends ago here in front of the high school of all places. There's just that thing that you didn't set out a minute before that this is what I'm going to do, but something just quickly prompted you to kick in gear. Okay, with those little examples I just gave, my theory is when this prophet's going to run, it's going to kick Jehu into gear. Because we do know something about Jehu. Apparently, he drives like a maniac. Doesn't he? I think it's interesting that the officials along with Jehu call the guy that runs a maniac, and then that later the lookout on the tower describes Jehu as a maniac. His driving is like that of a maniac. I think it kicks something into gear for Jehu to get something going and start after Joram and Ahaziah and Jezreel. Now that's my theory as to maybe why Elisha said, go tell him the message and then run. Because when you do that, it'll startle him and he'll kind of react on that. It's speculative, okay? I know that it is speculation, but I think that there's something to that. Otherwise, I can't really make out why else would. There does not seem to be an imminent threat against this official or this prophet, but things to ponder. Why do you think Jehu's officials called the prophet a maniac? Because he runs, I think. 3, why did Jehu respond to his officials the way he did? In other words, what did he say? They want to know what the prophet said. And he says, you know the man and the sort of things he says. And I have to think, okay, is he saying, well, you know the man. Is he referring to the prophet that Elisha sent, or is he referring to Elisha, who's come on behalf of, who's saying what? I guess I am. If I said it. Who's on first, right? Elisha tells one of the company of the prophets, which is obviously a prophet, go to Jehu, tell him this is what the Lord says, you're going to be the king. And then Elisha tells that prophet, open a door and run. Okay? When that happens and he runs, Jehu comes out and his officials say, what did that maniac want? And he says, you know that man, the sort of things he says. They're talking about the guy that just ran off. Well, Jehu's response could be about that guy who just ran off, or it could be the guy that man who ran off works for, Elisha. Mm-hmm. And this is also interesting because I didn't really get into this specific detail. If you read it, you saw it. Elisha's specific instructions to this prophet when he goes to Jehu is go find him, but get him off by himself. Get him away from his men. They go into Jehu's house where they're alone. And then he opens the door and runs out. So it piques the interest of what just happened, because that's an executive session. They're not privy to these words. So he comes out, well, what'd he say? That's what they want to know. Now, does that answer your question? So there's a lot of he said, a lot of people talking there. Why do you think Jehu's driving could so easily be spotted? There's actually a really funny story. If I had my phone on me, I'd see if I could pull it up. I may do that before tonight's over with, because I think I'm going to get done early. That involves Jehu, and it also involves a little bit of Jezebel in the story. Why does Jezebel put on makeup? Okay. Yeah, that just now reminded me of a scene in Titanic. Doesn't the captain of the ship go in and put his formal stuff on, his deals, and...
Yeah, maybe she knows. I don't know if she knows she's about to die. Maybe she does, but she knows there's going to be some serious trouble. And I do think possibly at that time they kind of thought that way, like if there's going to be a battle of some kind, I'm going to look my best.
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe in a way, that's like respecting the situation. What I mean is like, okay, like a coach wears a suit and tie because he respects the game of basketball.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a preacher wears a suit and tie because he respects, what he does, his profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just saying that her putting on the eye makeup and knowing he's coming, because am I right about that?
Well, it's a part of my discussion on the second page, and I do think that's what's going on.
It's like the respect for what is about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now
I think you're not way off, but I was going to give that the first possible answer is because she needs all the help she can get with her looks.
I may be way off.
I always go for the little comical stuff before I get to the serious possibility. Sam?
She's always intimidating.
Mm-hmm. Oop.
Pretty much what you're saying is an act trying to intimidate.
Okay. Well, and I'm not sure if I'm thinking he's saying that it's an intimidating act. It could be, but he is saying, this may be my end. I'm going to at least look the part. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, yeah,
Well, so I would suggest that if you look historically with her activities as queen, she had her hand in everything. Who do you think really was in charge, Ahab or Jezebel? Don't you think it was Jezebel? And with that said, with Ahab gone, don't you think she's been studying the moves and has been kept briefed on Joram and Ahaziah about what's all going on, and now knows that, probably has heard that Jehu is king now, probably knows what's going down before we get to her in this text. It's like she was expecting him, you know. So I think that's what leads her to, whether it's intimidating or it's just the fact that, well, this is my end, but I'm going to at least make the show that I'm still impressive, even to the bitter end. Sam?
I guess I'd be a little different. Her thought was, I'm going to present myself like that. I'm very
Mm-hmm.
kind of challenging because you know what I believe.
Yeah. And I kind of mentioned this already. Why did Jezebel call Jehu Zimri? And I think it's obvious that she explains that, you know, he killed his predecessor. What made Jehu think, I'm turning the page now, what made Jehu think that there would be someone with Jezebel who'd be willing to turn on her? Why would he think somebody up there could be on my side? Why do you think he thought that's the possibility? Now, I know there's the obvious answer. Well, he's a prophet. Well, no, Jehu's not a prophet. Sorry. But he may have been informed that there would be that help. But I also think that when you've got somebody as wicked and cantankerous as Jezebel was, even though you might work for that lady, you serve, you're employed, you could have your fill, and it doesn't take much to turn. And if you think that your career here is about to the end, that this is imminent, you see handwriting on the wall, if you got your eyes open, you may think, okay, yeah, and Jehu may be gambling here. I think there's somebody up there that'd be on my side. It seems to me that we've already seen an indication that the horsemen that Joram had sent out don't seem to rebel or revolt against Jehu when he says, fall in behind me. It almost makes me think, I wonder if they felt safer now they finally left that place and were now behind the triumphant one. So when the 2 or 3 eunuchs look out the window, he says, throw her down. Any other points to ponder about the story?
Can she hear them say that? Like, can she hear them say, throw her down?
Yeah. I mean,
She knows she's about to die.
well, she hears what they said.
She's hearing it.
She's peering out the window.
Before my eyes right now.
The way I picture the scene, and of course, we don't have this exactly specifically detailed, but she's looking out the window. 2 or 3 of them look out the window, maybe the same window. Who's on my side? Throw her down. You look at your buddy, you look at the other one, and you grab her and throw her.
She's like, uh-oh, this is it.
Yeah.
Does anybody like her?
No. No, I'm going to answer that before anybody here possibly gets in trouble about commenting on a mother-in-law or something like that, okay? I'm just going to say no. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, that's it. I mean, she had been such a ruthless person her entire life. She's not going to have any friends.
This may get a little uncomfortable, But Jesus brought it up, okay? Some people were born eunuchs. You know where I'm going with this? Some were made eunuchs. And some made themselves eunuchs. There's a strong possibility, I think this is plausible, that these eunuchs didn't fall in categories 1 or 3. It may be due to her that they're eunuchs. I wouldn't be too happy about that. So they have some hidden agenda. I know it's uncomfortable, but look at the situation you've got. She usually gets what she wants, and this is usually, something that she had the power to do. Oh yeah, yeah. Let's go to the discussion. How would you describe Jehu's courage? I don't know about y'all, but when I think about his driving, I'm thinking, okay, he's the typical red-blooded American boy that just loves to drive fast, to take risks. Hey, y'all, watch this. That mentality. And sometimes, Well, right. But that may just be why God chose him as the next king. He needed a guy like Jehu to do that. An impetuous, ruthless person to deal with a ruthless woman. Because it doesn't seem like Jehu backs down at all. He goes after, he has a plan, he goes after Joram, after Ahaziah, and then as soon as that's done, he's going after Jezebel. That's why he goes back to Jezreel. How does Elisha's dealings with Jezebel differ from Elijah's dealings with Jezebel? Well, Elisha seems to be kind of the behind-the-scenes guy. We don't have him mentioned except at the beginning when he says, go give this message to Jehu. And it sets the entire thing in motion, doesn't it? While Elijah feels intimidated and personally responsible for having just won that battle back at Mount Carmel, and now Jezebel's after me, and he's intimidated, he's afraid. We know he was afraid. Elisha seems to be more in control here to set this in motion and let it play out. And he's got Jehu to just do this very thing for him. Of course, I think God's behind it. How important is it that we try peaceful solutions first? I know that in this story it fails. But is it a wise thing to send out a delegation, say, are you coming in peace? I think it is. I think we ought to always seek the way of peace first. And it's when you have no more options, then you can run, hide, or fight, I guess, to use a responsive attack awareness. You run, you hide, or you fight. There's a passage in Romans that says, as much as depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And what Paul is saying there, it's not always possible. If it's possible, do this. And he also is saying you can only do what depends on you. You can't make the other person's mind up for them, how they're going to proceed. You can only decide how you're going to proceed. And if the other person doesn't proceed reciprocating the same way for peace, then you may not be able to get along. But you ought to at least seek those peace things first. And Jesus in the Beatitudes said what about peacemakers? Yeah, they'll inherit the earth. Okay? What are some things that make peace impossible? Bullheadedness. If the other party is not objective, has made up their mind, is stubborn, is hard-hearted, whatever you want to call it, then there is no dialogue to be had. There's no effective communication that can be had that's going to resolve that. What were you going to say, Jeff? Or what were you saying? Yeah. Yeah, people like Jezebel. In an attack situation, I'm thinking in terms of things that escalates a incident, the threat to someone's life, that escalates it. If the guy's holding a gun, and if there's, imminent danger, when your back is up against the wall. I think even Jesus knew you've only got one cheek to turn. It's interesting about Jesus and what he told his disciples. How many of you knew that Jesus said first of all, he told them not to pack a big suitcase, carry a purse, carry a coat. How many of you knew he said, and get you a sword? Did you know he instructs his disciples to buy a sword? Now wait a minute, didn't he tell Peter, put your sword away? Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. He actually gave the instructions for them to buy a sword. The priest's ear, yeah. And of himself he would say, and I do think this sounds contradictory, and you need to check me out on this because I don't have my phone to Google this. In one place he says, I've come to give peace. In another place, I don't bring peace, I bring a sword. The context is different. I don't think it's a contradiction, but an average amateur reader of Scripture might not see that and say, that's a contradiction. Because it does sound like that on the surface. I do think there are many occasions in Scripture where God was okay with you defending yourself. Now, in the point of Jesus going to the cross, he went as a lamb before its shearer, silent, submissive, willing to go.
Are you saying physically you think there's times he thinks it's okay to defend yourself?
Yes. Yes.
Even in this, for example, something along the lines, premeditated murder, they threw her out of the window. That's premeditated. It's throw her down, and they did. That's premeditated.
Yeah.
Even though the command was, thou shalt not kill. But her evil was such a great amount, the only way to stop her evil was by her death.
Yeah, I think I would stop short calling it premeditated. I can kind of see that, but I also think this is part of God's judgment against her. It's not like... they're not acting, and I don't think Jehu is acting outside the judgment of God that was already against her. So it's not like, okay, you're up for murder now that you threw her down. God was okay with that.
Yeah, but I think that's an example of there
Yeah.
are times when you have to take that action to stop the evil that's taking place.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of another example, and I was trying to think of New Testament, and I'm not really coming up with anything really that I can think of except for, well, no, I really can't think of. I really can't think of anything that is literal, but I do think of the passage in Ephesians where the spiritual application of the spiritual armor is there. Take that sword, take that shield of faith, get that breastplate, that helmet, that belt of truth, your feet prepared with the readiness of the gospel of peace. I do see that the soldier analogy is thrown into the mix. Paul says, I fought the good fight. Now, that didn't mean that he resisted arrest or that he hit back the people that had him in prison. But I do think like there are groups out there, religious groups, the Quakers, the Amish probably are this way, you know. A lot of groups out there that are pacifists. There's many in the church that, historically speaking, were pacifists, didn't believe in going to war. But I don't think God intends for you to, if you have the means, the wherewithal to defend yourself, you ought to defend yourself when possible. Yeah, and to go on behalf of others to defend them. I'm just trying to think of a New Testament example. In the Old Testament, I can think of, let's see. Yeah. That's a good question. I'd like to give that more thought, maybe give you some more definitive examples of that, but I do believe the principle is there. Mm-hmm. 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 Going back to the question initially, question 4, what are some things that make peace impossible? Anger. You do not think rationally when you're angry. The blood rate, the heart rate is up. You get focused in on a thought and it weighs everything out. You're not listening. You have this fit of rage in that moment, in the heat of the moment. You are able to do things that you might regret later. There is not a conducive environment for diplomacy when the anger is present. That's true in marriage counseling. It's true between employer-employee relations, parent-child relationships. That's why many times before you can reach or achieve any kind of resolve to that conflict, we need time out to go cool off. Go to your room. Don't say that to your spouse, okay? But you may have to say, can we come back to this? I need to make sure that I don't say hurtful things I'll regret. Because I think we've all been there in some point or another. And when you've said a hurtful thing, you can't take it back. It's left your mouth. If you push send on that email, it's gone. So I think that's one of the things that can make peace impossible. So it could be the other party, stubborn refusal. It could be anger in the mix. And quite honestly, the underlying issue to every one of these, and you could say all these roads lead to sin. It's sin. Sin gets in the way of peace. I think we've already dealt with question 5. What does Jehu's request to bury Jezebel's body say about him? That's question 6. What, Jeff? Mm-hmm. Throw her down, but now bury her. Uh-huh. Okay? Yeah, I think it says of Jehu, you know, I am human. You know, that was someone's mother, that was someone's wife and someone's daughter, and you know, you don't like the behavior, but you know.
He says this as he's stuffing his mouth.
That's the other thing I was thinking about pondering on. Well, I was pondering on. But throw her down, and then the blood splatters, and the horse are trampling. He goes in and he's eating and drinking. Then he says, "Go." Now he says it this way: "Go bury that cursed woman." So it wasn't 100% respect there, but at least okay, we need to probably bury her.
Her death with the dogs eating her body kind of reminds me of Harry and
Oh
worms.
yeah, eaten by worms. I actually had an effect that I would do in VBS when we had a part. You know those little black pellets at 4th of July, when you light them, they expand. We had a guy playing Haired one day in our VBS, and we had glued those to his shirt. And as he comes out, we had a guy back there lighting those. And so when he came out, these things are expanding on his chest to illustrate, and Herod was eaten by worms. It's so good. It was special effects stuff. But anybody here hungry? Are we going to Perkins after this? I have the church credit card. There's an elder back there. He just has to sign off on it. Okay. Things to consider. Not all delegations are successful. One's own reputation can precede themselves. That's true of Jezebel. It's apparently true of Jehu too in his driving. Sin will always catch up to you. I think it was Moses. I think it's Moses. I think it's in Exodus. Be sure that your sin will find you out. Vengeance is the Lord's. This was vengeance for Naboth and his sons. And in the end, God always wins. But here's the problem we have with that. We struggle with the fact that we have to wait for the end of it, because we'd like to think this gets resolved right here, right now. But in the end, God always wins. If you ever thought that somebody who historically that was in the news that committed some crime or was accused and they got acquitted, and you think they got away with it, I want you to realize something. They'll get theirs. Sin does not pay. Even though you can maybe skip through the system and find loopholes, we are all still accountable to every word we say and action and deed. So you don't get away with it with God. And so Jezebel and Joram and Ahaziah and others, and we're going to see more of that next week in chapter 10 when we talk about more of Ahab's family being killed. Okay, I got done 5 minutes early. How about that? Let's go ahead and sign off. We'll see you guys Sunday on YouTube and on Facebook. Hope everybody has a great weekend.